Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to learn all about the origins of American gun culture. Now I know different people fall on different sides of the gun argument, but we're going to find out how it all started anyway. Now just before we get into it, if you are enjoying these reaction videos, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. Without any further delay, let's get into it. This should be interesting.
If you look at all the maps of the Spanish Empire you can find, you will notice that the Spaniards claimed far more land than they actually had. Claims that were sometimes outright ridiculous, costly, and completely unenforceable. However, in North America, not only did they claim more than they actually had, but being that they were the first to colonize the American continents, one has to wonder why they failed at enforcing all their claims. Claims that stretched from Alabama to Minnesota to Alaska and even to Hawaii, over a total of what are today 27 US states. Guns and property is the short answer. The Spanish came to the New World to conquer existence.
Yeah, so I mean, interesting fact for those, say, non-Americans that aren't familiar, but Spain was the first one to, lay siege on the America continents. Christopher Columbus, I believe, created that expedition and landed in Central America, and Spain therefore took over certain regions first, and then only after that did the other European nations, such as Britain, such as France, come afterwards. So Spain were first, I believe.
Existing societies, build new societies, and mold it all into their global empire. Unlike the Dutch, British, and French, who mainly had financial interests, the Spanish idea of empire had more in common with how the Romans built empires.
Right.
They wished to export the Spanish way of life, assimilate conquered people into their society, and enforce a Spanish social structure upon their subjects. And part of Spanish colonial life was that the colonials were strictly forbidden from owning firearms. Colonial subjects didn't own firearms or even property, but were mostly day laborers on plantations and mining complexes owned by corporate interests like the Basque Guipuzcoan Trading Company. When Spain came to the New World, it encountered large native kingdoms such as the Aztecs, so Spain brought an army and conquered them. But when the Spaniards encountered nomadic native nations in places like Chile, Texas, Venezuela, and New Mexico, they ran into trouble. You can conquer Tenochtitlan, but how do you conquer a constantly moving group of peoples not dependent on one particular spot of land? The Spaniards encountered the same nomadic warfare that bested the Romans, Russians, and Chinese before them. And since they banned their citizens from owning firearms, the only way a semblance of security could be established was by an expensive military presence. In short, it was only safe to live where the Spanish crown stationed troops. Elsewhere, well, not so much. Caracas was burned down by a native warband when it was garrisoned by the Spanish army. The Spaniards fought an almost 300-year-long war with the Apaches, Suma, and Mansu throughout northern Mexico, Texas, Nevada, and New Mexico. And unlike the wars we know from popular culture involving the Americans from much later, the Spaniards lost. Ranches were burnt to the ground, mines destroyed, and entire towns pillaged and burnt. The Spanish army was hopelessly lost in this vast region, perfect for ambushes and hit-and-run attacks.
Is this why, Spain eventually started occupying the more regions down south, such as, Central America and South America? Was it because they were unable to truly, encapsulate that North American region? Interesting to know.
Spanish settlers were barred from owning any firearms or form militias to defend themselves. Whatever expedition pushed further north and to the east didn't fare any better. Spanish expeditions sent to explore and settle Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi just disappeared, and presumably because they were wiped out by the Cherokee. Then, in the 1600s, the Spaniards started executing Pueblo shamans for sorcery and witchcraft. The Pueblo, who were a settled people, rebelled and kicked the Spaniards out of Santa Fe and the Rio Grande Valley, restricting Spanish activity to southern Texas and California from then on. The Spanish colonial social order didn't allow for a successful settling of this area, as it was unequipped to conquer and assimilate nomadic natives or patrol the vast lands.
They were definitely limited.
The British had a completely different colonial policy. They explicitly encouraged their colonial subjects to own firearms. More than that, they handed out the land they had taken from the natives to settlers. And that land, aka property, is the reason why most of these settlers came in the first place. Europe was a mess of large landowners, serfdom, high grain taxes, and famines. Political rights, if existent at all, were also tied to how much property a person owned. Having a plot of land that was your own was a prospect irresistible to many, and irresistible to the British Crown was what these settlers would do on that property. Buy slaves, grow cash crops, sell them to British trading companies, and thereby increase the wealth of the empire. And the British also allowed the means of defending that property. The settlers
Right, so it seems like the British incorporated this gun culture into America. The British colonists who would later become the founding fathers who defended themselves against the British Empire. They're the ones that were allowed to have a gun. And that is in total contrast to those Spanish settlers, many years before. So it seems like it all started with these British colonists
would be personally invested in their colonial property and thereby the colonial economy. The British would profit, not have to spend money on an expensive large standing army, could invest in a large navy to bully others, and the armed colonials would take care of the French, natives and Spaniards because they weren't just protecting the empire but their own property. The mistake the British made in the end was assuming that this colonial strategy wouldn't backfire.
Yeah, it definitely did backfire. Those British colonists that you thought, would live in harmony with their guns, they eventually took you over and they became the founding Americans. Unbelievable.
The colonial policy of handing out the land and permitting the ownership of guns for settlers is one the British practiced in every colony they settled, which is why all these countries have less constraining laws on private gun ownership to this day, except for those who in modern days introduced...
Crazy this, yeah. There's a South Africa, bubble there on the left. Interesting.
Gun control laws. The United States, however, is different from the other colonies. Guns and the gun culture that developed became tied to property. The reason one owned a gun was to protect what was yours or what you had taken from others. It became essential to the promise of the country to those who came to it, but also part of its darkest chapters. As much as you may read or hear of the American gun culture as something tied to a violent history, racism, hunting, frontier life or other, and as much as you might hear debates by legal scholars and politicians theorize the modern and past meanings of the Second Amendment, the truth of the matter is that this country's gun culture developed out of and goes hand in hand with the promise of owning your own property and being permitted to defend what is yours. And that is a powerful drive that is hard to break. German and French gun culture revolved around having guns to kill each other. Polish gun culture revolves around being prepared for invasion. Same with Swiss gun culture. And as Europe increasingly became a more peaceful place, these gun cultures, and with them the ownership of guns, eroded or were drastically changed and reinvented. The United States have barely enacted any regulations to limit ownership of firearms, even when a sizable amount of the population used said firearms in an armed insurrection to keep slavery legal. If the Americans didn't restrict firearms ownership after they were used in an attempt to keep slavery legal, I doubt they will do so now after massacres and increased gun crime. There is, however, one thing that is steadily undermining the United States gun culture and might eventually be its undoing, something that is largely unnoticed in the modern gun debate. Ownership of private property is on the decline. And with the American gun culture being so deeply tied to property rights, what is most likely to in the end change the legal landscape on firearms in the United States is the change of American society itself from property owners into indebted, rent-paying day laborers.
Oh. Okay, folks. Well, that was a very interesting video indeed. What was the inception of American gun culture? It was to protect themselves and protect what they have. And I think if you speak to most proud Americans that are on that side of the gun argument, they will use that as their argument. It's more of a means to protect themselves. It's never as a means for offense. It's more defense. What side of the argument do you lie on? That's personally up to you to decide if you want to speak on that. But I'll definitely be interested in your opinion on whether you think gun culture in America is on the decline because of the lack of ownership of property, because of the various incidents we see in the news, or will it always maintain its same level. I'd be interested to know what your opinions are. But folks, that's all I have for you today. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I definitely highly appreciate it. But until next time, I hope you have a good one. I'll see you when I see you. Cheers.